Okay, so now we have our UI set up. We have our answer button prefab ready to go. We have our answer button object pool loaded with that prefab. We've created our game controller, game object, and we just need to attach a game controller class to it. So we're going to choose add component, create a new script, new C# script called game controller, and double click that to open it. And this is going to be a fairly decent sized script here. So first of all, we need a couple of namespace declarations. We're going to be using UnityEngine.ui because we're going to be interacting with some UI elements. We're going to be using UnityEngine.SceneManagement, and we're going to be using system.collections.generic so that we can use generic lists. Now, let's start with our start function. So the first thing that we're going to do is, so I'm not going to just write out all the variables at the top. I'm going to keep returning to the top to add variables as we need them. So I'm going to start with the start function. And in it, we're going to set up our data controller. So we're going to need a private data controller variable, which we're going to call data controller. And we're going to need a private round data variable called current round data. So, and then we're going to need a private array of question data called question pool. So these are going to be the questions that we're going to be working with in this round. And we're also going to need a Boolean, a private Boolean called isRoundActive, right? This means, is the game going, or has the timer run out, or has the, or have we run out of questions? And we are going to need a private float called time remaining, which is going to be the amount of time left in the round, and a private int called question index, and that's going to be what number question are we on. And then that should be what we need to get started. Okay, good. So in start, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to get and store a reference to our data controller. So data controller equals find object of type data controller. Now, you know, a lot of the time there are risks associated with using find, right? Because if you try to find something that's not there, you can get a null reference. In this case, we are very confident that the data controller is going to be there because we are always starting from our persistent scene, right? And it's set to don't destroy. So unless something has gone really terribly wrong, the data controller is going to be there. So we can use find with a high degree of confidence. Once we found it, then we're going to set current round data to equal data controller dot get round data. So we're going to get the round data from the data controller, store it in our current round data. Then from the round data, we're going to get our question pool. The question pool is going to be equal to current round data dot questions, right? That we're going to store the questions that we're going to be asking. And then we're going to set time remaining to equal current round data dot time limit in seconds, right? So we're getting a reference to the data controller, and then the data controller is going to supply all this data about the round, including the questions, the time limit, and so on. Then we're going to, we haven't added the player score. Let's add a private int player score, and that's going to be equal to 0. In start, we're going to initialize it. Player score equals 0. Question index is going to be equal to 0, right? We're going to start at the beginning of our list of questions. And isRoundActive is equal to true, right? Because the round has now started. Okay, so we're getting a reference to the data controller, getting the round data, right? Getting the questions out of the round data, getting the time remaining out of the round data, initializing the score and the question index, and saying, yes, the round is active, it's time to start. Now, the first thing that we want to do is to show our first question. So we are going to add a private variable that returns void called show question. But actually, the first thing that our show question function wants to do is to clear out any existing answer buttons that are there and send them back to the object pool. So before we can really write show question, we're going to write a function called remove answer buttons. Typing. And that's going to return void, of course. Maybe not, of course. That is going to return void. So remove answer buttons is just going to use a while loop to go through and return to the object pool any answer buttons that are currently in use. So what we're going to say is while, and in this case, we're going to need a new list for these answer buttons. So this is going to be a private list of the type GameObject called answer button GameObjects. And that's going to be equal to a new list of GameObjects. So this, we're going to check this list. So while answer button GameObjects dot count is greater than 0, we're going to keep removing things, right? So we're using the list of GameObjects to store all of the answer buttons that are currently in use and being displayed, right? And we need to use a list, right? Because we might have 2, we might have 3, we might have 4, however many answers you want. And because we have a dynamic size and we want to be able to resize it readily, a list is a good choice. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to call answer button object. Did we add it yet? No, we haven't. Okay, so we're also, because we're going to be interacting with the object pool, right? We're going to need a variable for it. So we're going to make a private, public, simple object pool called answer button object pool, and we're going to set that in the inspector. And what we're going to do here is we're going to say answer button object pool dot return object answer button game objects 0. So whatever game object is element 0 in our list is going to get returned to the object pool, meaning it's going to be deactivated and made ready to be recycled and reused. Then we're going to call answer button object pool dot remove, not object pool. We're going to call answer button game objects dot remove at 0. So we're going to send it back to the object pool to be ready to be reused and then remove it from the list of active answer button game objects. And so we need to write that because that is the first thing that show question is going to call, right? We want to set up a new question. The first thing that we're going to do is remove any old answer buttons so that we can be ready to display the new ones. So I'm just going to power through a little bit here just to get to a kind of a reasonable stopping point. So let's get show question written and then we'll pause for some Q&A. So first of all, we're going to declare a question data variable called question data to hold data about the current question that we're displaying answers for. And that's going to be equal to question pool question index. So we're going to go to our pool of questions and say, okay, we're on question number 1. Get that from the question pool and store it into question data. Then we're going to need a variable to display the question text. So we're going to have a public text variable called question text. And here now we are going to set question text dot text to equal question data dot question text. So we're going to reach into our pool of questions, get a question. From that question, we're going to get the string that is the actual question, like are lions carnivores or what do lions eat, and display that using our text, our question text UI element. Using our question text UI element. Next, we're going to loop over all of the answers and display those as well and add buttons as needed. So we're going to use a for loop here. So we're going to say for int I equals 0, I is less than, for as long as I is less than question data dot answers dot length. So however many answers this particular question has, we're going to get buttons to display them. Then I++. Nope. I++. Typing skills. Okay, so now the first thing that we need is a game object variable, which is going to be called answer button game object. That's the button that we're going to be working with and setting up. And we're going to get that from the object pool. So we're going to say answer button object pool dot get object. So basically just get me another spawned button that's currently not being used, and we're going to get ready to set it up. So once we've gotten a button, we're going to set answer button game object dot transform dot set parent, and we're going to parent it to our answer button panel that we made. And so we need a variable for that as well. So we're going to make a public transform called answer button parent. And grab that and pass that in to transform.setParent. So by parenting the buttons to the panel, they're going to fall into that vertical layout group, right, and get laid out nicely. Okay, so then we're going to add an answer button variable called answer button, and we're going to set that to equal answer button game object dot get component answer button. So we're going to get a reference to the answer button script attached to the answer button game object, and we're going to call its setup function. So we're going to say answer button dot setup, and we're going to pass in question data dot answers I. So whatever answer we're currently setting up from this piece of question data, we're going to pass in to the answer button script, right, to its setup function, and it is then going to set the text of the button to display the correct or the relevant answer. Okay. I think, okay, so then here we just need to call show question from start before we make the round active. And we need to set up our references in the inspector. Let me pause here before I go and do that, since we've reached some kind of a pausing point. So what we should be able to do at this point is to populate, to display a question with however many answers, which currently are not going to be clickable. Or at least once we set up our references in the inspector, we should be able to do that. But let me pause for some questions because I saw the chat moving and see how you guys are doing.